Haile Selassie. Mortimer Plano became famous for one, having been on the UN-sponsored 1961 mission to Ethiopia and other African states, for two, restoring control over the wildly enthusiastic crowd that prevented Haile Selassie from disembarking from the airplane on which he traveled in 1966 to Jamaica, and three, for a spiritual intellect called, by the Latin translation, in sapientia spirituali, which informed his deeper understanding of the life and influence on the world of his idol Rastafari of Ethiopia, with which he imbued his mentoring of Bob Marley's conversion to Rastafarianism. I was in my first year at university in Jamaica, and Roy Auger was my philosophy professor. He was one of the three academics entrusted to embark on a comprehensive analysis of the impact of the disruptive Rastafarian movement, which was being increasingly embraced by male youth in the society. Roy Auger challenged us to seek what turned out to be life-altering conversations with Plano, the prophet of Rastafarianism, based in the underbelly of Kingston's inner city. Three of us musketeers, two guys and a girl, responded and were transformed by the spiritual intellect he acquired from Selassie, that higher dimension of intelligence beyond the ego that has access to the mature qualities and advanced capabilities of the true self. It was expressed in the form of wisdom, compassion, joy, love, and peace through the pervasive melodies and lyrics of Marley's reggae songs that mystify demonstrably his most ardent fans and critics worldwide. I remember him, a thoughtful and sincere Rasta prophet who understood the Bible, the history of Africans as slaves and as colonials, and like every red-blooded Rastafarian, a disciple on his own terms of the man named Rastafari Makonnen. His claim to the throne was as a direct descendant from the biblically described interlude between Queen Sheba and King Solomon. Haile Selassie's immense power is reflected in his illustrious title, quote, by the conquering Lion of Judah, His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, elect of God. His Imperial Majesty governed Ethiopia from 1930 until he was removed by military coup in 1974. Rastafarians throughout the world adored Emperor Haile Selassie. I am struck by the aura of his lingering presence. Even after his death, he continues to live through the lyrics of Bob Marley and the multitude of faithful followers who believe in his relevance. One of the disappointments with colonialism that Plano agonized over related to the behavior of the British, who paid handsome compensation to owners of plantation slaves after emancipation, but ignored the plight of the ex-slaves who were demonized and abused and who were never given a fair shake. Mortimer Plano, therefore, believed in repatriation at government expense to Africa, and in reparation for the descendants of the freed slaves, literally abandoned by the system. Quote, some without understanding call us escapists, he regretted, but we just needed a little help to come to terms with the sudden adverse conditions following on the heels of a liberation that left us high and dry. I took an interest in the movement, but did not appreciate then the strong connection with the Ethiopians via the local chapters of the Ethiopian World Federation, which was headquartered in New York. However, to achieve my post-graduation objective to become a barrister at law, I migrated from Jamaica in 1962 and met Uncle Richard Gordon in New York while in transit to Britain. It was then, in the summer of 1962, that I received my grand-uncle's education in genealogy and his recognition of our family's place in the history of Jamaica. One interesting character was Cecil George Gordon, who was leader of the EWF Chapter 31 in Kingston. He traveled often on Federation business to New York or Washington. Uncle Richard's great pride and joy was traveling in Cousin Cecil's official limousine, protected by the traditional spectacular array of police outriders. In fact, Cecil's most recent engagement was the previous year's travel to Ethiopia and other African countries, and he's pictured above, dressed as usual in robes, being greeted by Haile Selassie at the palace in Addis Ababa. This fulfilled one of the recommended measures of the academics O.J. Smith and Nettleford report to Jamaica's Premier, Norman Manley. Selassie, although undoubtedly a charismatic figurehead, was not without personal heroic achievement. Between accession to the throne in 1930 and his triumphant visit to Jamaica in 1966. He is credited with defeating Mussolini's attack with support of the UK and receipt of a cavalcade of weaponry from Adolf Hitler, partly to distract Italy from focusing too much on protecting Austria. Hitler also approved a pro-Ethiopian propaganda movie produced in Germany. In the immediate post-World War II years, Ethiopia spearheaded decolonization in Africa, and his government led the movement for collective security by joining the United Nations as a founding member. He also dedicated thousands of troops to the UN efforts in the Korean War and was a long-time torchbearer of independence for Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, and as the first nation liberated from Axis aggression during World War II, Ethiopia held a special place in the imagination of African nationalists and civil rights leaders. Likewise, during the first half of the 20th century, America was seen to the Ethiopian imagination as a counterbalance to Europeans and their colonial ambitions in Africa. The emperor also influenced Ethiopia through his reforms, including the founding of Ethiopian Airlines, which greatly contributed to the country's GDP. The University of Addis Ababa was built by Selassie, and he is widely credited with expanding tertiary education. On May 25, 1963, Selassie's choice was to establish permanent headquarters for the Organization of African Unity in Ethiopia's capital, and he is regarded as one of the OAU's founding fathers. His words on that occasion were prescient with respect to South African apartheid. Quote, "Just like colonialism, he said, it will shortly remain only as a memory. If we pool our resources and use them well, its spectre will be banished forever." His notable speech at the League of Nations back in 1936 caused him to be known as a statesman and a champion of his people. He was welcomed in the world's capital with pomp and ceremony, as befits a dignified sovereign with peaceful intentions. And he is, because of the same wise and humble persona, revered by Rastafarians everywhere. Many followers in Jamaica even perceive him as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. I believe, based on documents I've read, that Cecil G. Gordon's understanding as to a development plan for Jamaicans migrating to Ethiopia was in perfect sync with those of Haile Selassie, particularly with respect to personally owned lands he made available in Shashemene. It is reported that when Cecil G. Gordon, a more secular activist, took over the presidency of Local 31 in 1942, he refused to integrate the bearded Rastafari into the EWF. This led to the creation of other informal and non-recognized groups and fragmented the base of legitimacy of the Pan-Ethiopian organization. One EWF longtime officer living at Shashemene explains that Rastas were viewed as escapists, dropouts, ganja smokers, and were kept outside the meeting rooms, while others who didn't believe in Haile Selassie's messianic role were inside, and yet, quote, they included all varieties of non-believers. Correspondence exists which suggests a deeper appreciation of the dynamic between Addis Ababa and Kingston. In a letter to Cecil G. Gordon and E. L. Brooks from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church Patriarchate, Addis Ababa, reads, "We are in full sympathy towards the ideals and aspirations of your people in the matter of establishing the ancient apostolic church there. A similar identification of interests is apparent in the exchange between those close to the Emperor and Cecil Gordon. In a 1960 letter from Lizaine Workwuabu, New York, to Cecil G. Gordon, President of the Ethiopian World Federation, Inc., Jamaica, reads, "It would be wise if you, Mr. Gordon, will get many members for a new start of the church and school there, where we shall educate our young people of Jamaica and send them to the University of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for a higher special education." In fact, Cecil G. had, as early as September 1955, been informed, a copy of the letter attached, of the land grant of 500 acres of fertile land in response to a request to His Imperial Majesty for the benefit of black people of the West who had come to Ethiopia's aid when attacked. I was fascinated with the historical significance of Selassie, and from my conversations with Plano, I developed the fantasy, the wish that I could meet him, the elect of God, in person to ascertain the truth, which explains why I chose him as my historical figure. And as for the questions, I would ask him what he thought of the contribution of my cousin Cecil in terms of development goals for Jamaican migrants, and why does it look like Cecil was sidelined? How was His Imperial Majesty able to navigate the steady stream of myths and being God worshipped by Rastas? How he really felt about slavery, which practice continued under his watch in Ethiopia, and what are his views as to the justice of reparation, repatriation, and resettlement, and the significance of Marcus Garvey, with whose prophecy of an African Messiah he was saddled. Finally, how does he respond to the charges of cowardice and despotism, and what he expected would become of the non-Ethiopian Rastafarian subjects he has left behind? These answers won't be known unless through a more in-depth study of the historical background, and more so, Bob Marley's lyrics, quote, "Love, friendship, laughter, some of the best things in life really are free."